So I wanted to conclude talking about purification practice, which I talked about in my last two BBCs. I went over the first two opponent powers, and I want to cover the other two. So the next one, the third one, is remedial action. And this is about imbuing our minds with virtue. Virtue is a strong counterforce to non-virtue, like lightness is to darkness. And I would say the same thing with all the four opponent powers, that's why they're opponent powers. They're counterforce to non-virtue. Regretting a non-virtuous action is a virtuous mind. Restoring wanting to restore the relationship is a virtuous mind. Taking refuge and generating bodhicitta are very powerful, virtuous minds, and as is also the resolve to avoid non-virtue in the future. And actually, these minds are as powerful as we make them with our practice, because if we're working day to day, moment to moment, to transform our minds. And so, the mind that's prostrating, mindfully prostrating and reciting the names of the 35 Buddhas, this is quite a different mind than the mind that led to the action that we want to purify. And so it's a very good counterforce. It's also a very different mind than the mind one might have when you're prostrating to the 35 Buddhas and reciting the names of the 35 Buddhas and have a mind that's very distracted and just rotely going through the practice. So the effectiveness of any purification practice is based on a mind that engages with these four opponent powers, strongly engages with them, sincerely. I want to read a quote here. This is from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And he says, the third power is the power of engaging in virtuous actions specifically aimed at purification. Whenever you engage in a virtuous action, you can direct it towards the purpose of purifying your negative karma. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the general custom is to engage in the practices specifically associated with purification, of which 6 are often cited: reciting the names of the Buddhas, especially in the Bodhisattva's Confession Sutra with prostrations to the 35 Buddhas, reciting certain mantras, especially the 100-syllable mantra of Vajrasattva and the mantra of Vajra Akshobhya, reciting sutras, meditating on emptiness, making offerings, and commissioning the creation of images. And this comes from His Holiness's book, The Path to Enlightenment, which is a commentary on Atisha's Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, and Lama Tsongkhapa's Lines of Experience. So although this step of remedial action is traditionally done with certain religious practices that we can dedicate any virtuous activities towards purification. And in this text, His Holiness refers to this power as the power of virtuous activity, which really says a lot about what it means. Yeah. But this can include working as soup kitchen, helping those in need, offering service to a Dharma center or a monastery, or whatever virtuous activities we may be engaging in. We can dedicate these towards purification. So although we should engage in formal purification practices, it is good to be aware that keeping good ethical conduct, although it keeps us from engaging in non-virtuous actions, it also has a purifying effect on our mind. When we habituate ourselves to avoiding negative actions such as the 10 non-virtues, and develop the habit of engaging in virtuous activities, and we also want to habituate our minds towards virtuous mental states that support this. Then we are doing the work of transforming our minds. And this is Dharma practice. The resolve, the fourth opponent power, is this is the resolve to avoid doing this action again in the future, whatever action we are purifying. And sometimes this may be habitual action. We may do something that we can purify and say, yes, I will avoid this in the future. Or it may be a habit, and then we need to make a resolve not only that we won't do it in the future, but the resolve to work on our minds so that we don't do it in the future. Because keeping the resolve is dependent upon learning and practicing the opponents to the kind of mind state that led to the action we have done that we're trying to purify, so that we do have the causes and conditions to not do it again in the future. And this is big. This is a big part of what I was thinking about in this, when wanting to do this BBC, is that what supports our keeping the resolve, and what supports it is the practice of working with the antidotes, recognizing afflictions, recognizing when they come up and countering them, and being practiced in the antidotes to those afflictions. And although the ultimate antidote is to have a direct realization of emptiness that will remove the afflictions from their roots, until we have such a realization, the afflictions will continue to arise in our minds. And indeed, we are habituated to them, most of us. And so every time I do a negative action, I am strengthening that habit. And every time I resist and refrain from that, I am countering that habit. I'm weakening that habit. I'm creating a habit of refraining from that. And so every time that the afflicted mind comes up that would lead to that action, I have the choice of doing one or the other. There's really not going to be this just stays the same. We're either going to counter it and weaken that habit, or we're going to strengthen it. And so it's a good thing to think of when habitual mental states come up, because we can be talking about resisting an action, but really we're looking at the affliction and not letting it come up unchallenged. And that's a term that has come up for me that I've been using that helps me lately, is not letting it be unchallenged. Because we do have mental states come up. We may be habituated towards being triggered by something and have a habit of responding angrily to that. But if we can see that and say, oh, I'm going to weaken this right now. This is my opportunity to weaken this. And the Buddha talks about recognizing when something is first arising, before it rises. So with anger, I would say we get familiar with what it feels like to be irritated or annoyed by something. If we're not familiar with that and we don't see that as a problem, then we're going to be only dealing with anger when it's a hot fire, instead of recognizing the sparks and putting them out. And so it's there's a lot of work to be done with whatever mind led to that action. And I think that's very important with the power of resolve. And we're taught to conclude our purification practices with a reflection on emptiness. So the action being purified is a dependent arising, as are all four of the opponent powers. Regret is a dependent arising. And among others, these things are dependent, something to recognize, all things are dependent on many things, and I'm going to list some of them. Among other things, regret is dependent on recognition that the action is harmful and a desire to act virtuously. Restoring the relationship is dependent upon the desire to repair the relationship, as well as upon regret. Remedial action depends on virtue and a desire to perform virtue. And the resolve is dependent upon regret also, and a desire to do better in the future. It's also dependent upon the things that help you to keep the resolve. And keeping the resolve is dependent upon learning the practices, the antidotes that counter that mental state that led to that. And all four of these opponent powers are very interdependent with one another. I remember somebody that I was corresponding with putting apologizing in the remedial action category, where I had thought of it more in the repairing the relationship. And I see that it could fit in either, and both. They're very overlapping. And these last two remedial actions are very dependent upon ethical conduct. Virtuous actions, we want to be doing virtuous actions through our day, not just a virtuous action during our formal practice. We may, and it's very good to do these prostrations and recite the names of the Buddhas or whatever practice we're doing, mantras, but also just to be doing our best to fill our day with virtuous actions and ethical conduct. And being dependent, all these things are empty. That's what we were learning all last weekend, right? If something's dependent, it can't exist from its own side. So yes, when we come to the point of being able to understand emptiness and have that understanding being a direct realization, we will pluck the afflictions out by their roots through meditating on that direct realization. But until then, our practice of purification, our practice of ethical conduct, and the practice of cultivating mental states is of the utmost importance.